We've been told that there's a new expanded role coming for Dallas Turner, but what is that actually going to be? Let's think about it on Locked On Vikings.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Happy Friday here on the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate my hashtag everydayers so very much. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. Welcome to the secret bunker. For those listening, it looks different. It's been different. It probably sounds a little bit different and has all week. This is the last one of these from here, and then I'm going to go to parts even more unknown, and you're going to have some pre-recorded podcasts. So if any big news breaks next week that I'm not around for, and you're like expecting me to like break down some big trade or something like that, I will get to it the following Monday. But for now, we can talk a little bit about something that has sort of piqued my interest. We've been talking about Dallas Turner a lot and what an expanded role might look like. We've been told by Brian Flores on the podium that that Dallas Turner is expected, that he considers Dallas Turner a starter and that he's expected to have a bigger role. There were some interesting little details that have cropped up from elsewhere that when you combine them all, you get a better sense of the picture. So today we're going to talk about that role. We're going to talk about kind of what problems you need to solve to make that work, and exactly what kind of impact that can have on a defense that's already very multiple. So there was an article from, there was a bunch of articles. The latest one was from Kevin Seifert. Everybody else has kind of written up these quotes from Brian Flores, who got on the podium at some point in OTAs, called Dallas Turner a starter, said he thinks of like 3 starters on the D line or in that edge group with Grenard and Van Ginkel, and Dallas Turner is the 3rd starter. And that implies, a much bigger role than he saw even at the end of last year. At the beginning of last year, he basically barely didn't play. At the end of last year, he played in a pretty solid rotational role. He had very much taken that kind of, he had usurped on the depth chart Jihad Ward and even Patrick Jones in a sense, although Jones was hurt, so it was a little different. And this implies even more than that. Like, you're really like a true key role for Dallas Turner. So the problem, the thing that you might be trying to work through in your head is, wait a minute, Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel, both Pro Bowlers, what gives, right? Why are those two guys are going to be at both edge spots? Where is Dallas Turner going to go? Are we taking one of those guys off? That's always been the big problem is, okay, these guys are playing at a Pro Bowl level. Which one of them are you sitting on the bench so that your rookie can get some snaps? And I brought this up on the Minnesota Football Party and to Ron Johnson, and Ron mentioned a couple things that he noticed in practice last year that he wasn't able to mention, but now that it's kind of in the past, he was able to mention it. And I want to relay that to you. Although go listen to the Football Party. It's on this very podcast feed. You can check that out. You can find it at Locked On Minnesota Sports as well, which is also a feed you should check out. But that is the role that he described is as this like roving around kind of hybrid, as this moving around the formation type of thing. He doesn't line up at edge. He lines up on the inside sometimes. He lines up off the ball sometimes. He lines up, as an overhang defender, blitzing off the edge sometimes. And Kevin Seifert also spoke of propose like a Josh Metellus kind of vibe, where like, where does Josh Metellus line up? Well, there isn't an answer to that question. It's everywhere. And with Dallas Turner doing that. But the problem is, and that was what they wanted to do last year. And I kind of think that thinking through that explains a lot of why he saw the field so little, beyond just that, the other 2 guys in his position room were really, really good, and he didn't want to take both of them off the field. Why in the beginning of the season, at least, he was getting outsnapped by Jihad Ward and Patrick Jones as well. And the reason is that they wanted Dallas Turner to play in coverage, and he backed off the ball. I want to say like a quarter of the time, which is quite a bit for an edge rusher, right? Like that's bordering on Micah Parsons like linebacker territory, right? Like that kind of role, and it just took him a while to get that down. Coverage is complicated, right? Like coverage is beyond just get back to a landmark, and I guess to kind of like fully tell this story, you have to remember the way the 2023 Vikings defense kind of got figured out, which happened in December. And it happened really with the Bengals, although there were a couple teams before the Bengals that sort of got a sense for it. But deep in the season, there's a lot of film on you. And they realized that when the Vikings would do their Bengal Hawk look, their old, that was what they used to have for cover zero. And depending on what protection was called, you could get Harrison Phillips in coverage. Like you could get big guys backing off the ball and going into coverage. And so you could sort of figure out where the biggest, slowest guy was, engineer the protection such that that's the guy that's going to back off. Once you figure out the rules, you can engineer the protection such that that guy's going to be the one in coverage. And then you could run a play at that guy and exploit him in coverage. Right. And part of the reason for that, it's not just that, Harrison Phillips is not going to outrun Amon-Ra St. Brown. It's also that the actual coverage job is a little inflexible. When you're telling a defensive lineman what to do in coverage, you are sort of designing that coverage such that he just needs to plop himself in the right space so that he's crowding routes the right way, and that other people can play off of him that are actually going to do the real, leg work and the real yeoman work in coverage. And it's a weak spot, but you're hoping to sort of mitigate that weak spot by saying, okay, you be there. And now it's like a quarterback is going to see a purple jersey and not throw that way, which is going to be something that, the linebacker next to you can rely on, can funnel something inside, knowing that if you give up a little space to the inside, there's another guy there. And even if he's not the best cover guy, he's still a purple jersey and the quarterback's not going to want to throw that way. And defenses figured out how to exploit this and how to ask that defensive player to do more than they're going to be trained to do more than they're capable of, right? Do more than they ever practice. And I think the idea here is to make Dallas Turner that guy. Make Dallas Turner that guy who's in coverage all the time, who can do a little bit of stuff, and who can be a little bit more flexible in coverage, who you can ask him to do more than just drop to a particular than just spot drop and keep your eyes on the quarterback, which is kind of all you can ask when it's Jonathan Bullard, right? You just hope that he can get back there. But with Dallas Turner, you hopefully can have him read a couple things in coverage, right? Change his positioning based on the routes, right? You can have him midpoint between two routes if you want. And that could mean the return of Bengal Hawk rules, which if you can paper over that terrible weakness, you could get back all the strengths, which are that you basically are guaranteed to have an unblocked player every time you call it. And therefore you compress the field a lot. You will never have anything deep, right? Theo Jackson can poop himself on the 40-yard line and it wouldn't matter. And like, it makes the outside corners' jobs easier, right? They can just play off and just kind of only cover the first 7 yards of routes. Everything gets a lot easier, right? If you can get that to return. But you can't just live in Bengal Hawk like you did in 2023. Everybody's got the sauce to stop that now, unless they start to call things that try to exploit Dallas Turner in coverage and then throw interceptions to him like Geno Smith did. So that interception is really like high in my mind right now as at least one play of proof of concept here that happened late in the season. Took him a while to get that. And from what it sounds like, and I'm going back through like quotes from Dallas Turner, quotes from Brian Flores throughout the season about how, he's learning a lot and he's this, steep learning curve. And so we don't really expect him, and it's starting to make sense that perhaps the Vikings wanted to have this package for him of, personnel, formations, alignments, and package of actual play calls, and couldn't do that because he wasn't learning the coverage stuff well enough. He didn't have a lot of experience with that in college, and coverage is very complicated. There's a lot of reading. There's a lot of stuff you have to do. I mean, I've spoken about that in a lot of depth in the past. I think I did like a guide to coverages like 2 weeks ago on this very show. And that was just barely scratching the surface of things. And he would have to know all of that stuff. He would have to know when he's supposed to widen out his zone, when he's supposed to deepen, when he's supposed to, sit on his heels and let things come to him, when he's supposed to jump, where his eyes are supposed to go, which isn't just to the quarterback. Not if you're going to do this for serious, right? Not if you're going to make him a real coverage player. You can't just snap your eyes to the quarterback. You have to be able to look at the routes, read them, read their stems, who's vertical, who's not, who's coming inside, who's coming outside. And that's a lot for a kid to learn. And if he didn't have it down, they can't use the package. It's just going to get smoked like it did in 2023. That makes a lot of sense to me. That isn't to say that Dallas Turner was not, without his critiques throughout his rookie year. And of course, the main obstacle is still that you have these two really good guys at edge rushing, and Dallas Turner's main thing coming out was edge rushing. So there's a little bit more nuance to this, and plus the actual plans you can come up with are really fun. We'll get into all of that next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Monarch Money. If you have ever looked at your bank account and just dropped a good involuntary has that ever happened to you? It happens to me sometimes. I mean, look, it gets away from you. Okay, sometimes you order a little bit too much delivery, you online shop a little bit more than you think, you put a bunch of stuff on your credit card and you go, oh no, I didn't manage this right at all. That is the kind of thing that Monarch Money is for. Or if you just want to be really on top of it and you're trying to build wealth, you're trying to take whatever money you can put away and maximize it, get the most that you possibly can out of it, Monarch Money can help you with that too. If you're the kind of person that has a bunch of finance apps on their phone, maybe one for investments, one for, retirement, one for just budgeting, one for maybe a joint account with a partner, Monarch Money can take all of that and consolidate it into one easy place. Put that thing on your front page and you're not going to have any more problems. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. I don't know if you can hear that, but if you can, it's been in all of these episodes. The air conditioner serenading us as we discuss Dallas Turner and Blitz packages. So there are a few super surface level questions about this whole idea of having a Dallas Turner package. And I don't know if it would be Bengal Hawk specifically, or if it would just be some kind of, cool sim pressure package thing that you can do with Dallas Turner that you can call all the time, that you can have be a staple, and you can give him a lot more snaps. And the question is, why, galaxy brain it this much? Why do we have to have a guy like Dallas Turner? I mean, it makes sense if he's the guy in your building, but you traded up to get this guy. And I think, why him? Why not just a linebacker that's pretty good at blitzing? Why not have Ivan Pace be this guy, right? He can, duck under a guard's shoulder. He can back off a little bit. And the reason is there's a big difference between off-ball linebacker and sim pressure defensive line, right? At the end of the day, both those guys want to end up in the same place in the coverage. If you want a hook zone, those guys are going to largely, if they play it right, no matter where you started on the play, you want to end up in the same place. So what's the rub, right? Ivan Pace is a more dedicated linebacker. Wouldn't he be better back there than trying to retrofit a hand in the ground defensive end? And my answer to that would be Ivan Pace up in the A gap doesn't work if it's not a passing down. If it's a neutral down and they can run, you might remember the second game of Ivan Pace, which was the Eagles game. I want to say it was Monday Night Football. It might have been Thursday Night Football. The last year of Kirk Cousins, and they ran for 300 yards. In part because you had 210-pound Ivan Pace, or he's 230, but you had this tiny little guy on lined up on Landon Dickerson one-on-one, and he can't hold that. So you can't do that, right? And Dallas Turner might have a better chance to like hold up to that block. I think he was up and down in that sense last year, and you want to see a little bit more bulk. And then he showed up to OTAs, and it looks like he does have a little more bulk. That might actually be huge. Just a little bit like more sand in your pants, right? A little more strength. And the other answer is that Dallas Turner, as a dedicated pass rusher, is just going to have more clubs in the bag. You know, somebody like Ivan Pace, or if you want to say Blake Cashman, or if you want to say, you know, Kobe King or whatever, versus an off-ball linebacker who is largely going to have a toolkit for head fake, juking someone, trying to dip a shoulder, trying to be small and get around them. Dallas Turner has like, you know, leverage abilities, and he can leverage and hold his spot if the center just comes at him, you know, if it turns out to be a run player. So that means that you can call this package on, you know, any down, right? On neutral downs, on, you know, big long passing downs would also be awesome. It gives it a little bit more flexibility. So that's like part of it. But the other part of it is that Dallas Turner's profile is pretty perfect. And I'm thinking like in their heads when they're in the war room, you know, or in their draft prep, when they're thinking about the idea of having Dallas Turner on their team, they're probably going, man, this guy is perfect for this. He's a D lineman. He can still do all the D line things you need to do, but he can back off and play that hook zone in a way that we'll never be able to ask Jonathan Bullard to do. Or now it would be, you know, Javon Hargrave or Jonathan Allen or still Harrison Phillips. You know, you're going to be able to have him back off and play that role better than anything. And you can have him, if you can teach him to line up in a whole bunch of different ways, you can move him all around and screw with so many different little blitz things. So as a refresher, if you've listened to this show for a long time, you've heard me give this spiel a lot with the Brian Flores defense and the way that it constructs a blitz. It like the way that they organize this is it's not just, hey, 5 guys go, right? Like there's more specific instructions. They have 2 or 3 man blitz packages, or blitz, like I call them like building blocks, right? 2 or 3 man blitzes. For example, me stunts and you stunts that tell an edge rusher and a tackle to do a twist, you know, or hot and cold, which I believe is the same thing, but the other way around, or, you know, a truck stunt, which is 3 guys in the middle doing a 3-man stunt, or there's something called, I don't think there's like an umbrella term for these, but like Odie is one of them, which is where you have 2 interior rushers take the gap to their right, and then a linebacker comes from depth and blitzes to the left. And it's like Odie and Opie and Okie and like all these different ones. That might be a really, really old term. That's from like a Belichick playbook in like the 90s. But you know, the words change. But the organizational system is that you've got all these little 3-man blitzes or 2-man blitzes, and then when you call a play, you will call multiple plays. So you could say, you know, you'd have your formation, you know, 5 odd Mac. That's your personnel in your formation. And then you would say, you know, hot flush. And, you know, hot tells 2 guys what to do on the left, and flush tells 3 guys what to do on the right. And then suddenly they're both running stunts, and you have a 5-man blitz, and everybody else is covering. And then you call whatever the coverage is behind it. So with that, you can move, like, let's just say you have kind of 6 principal possible pass rushers in a nickel down, and you have, you know, your edge rusher, 2 tackles, edge rusher, 2 off-ball linebackers, and let's divide them all into groups of 2, right? 2 guys that are next to each other, and you can have them do whatever little stunt you want. And then you can just plop Dallas Turner into that, and let's say this is going to be a big blitz, right? So we're only going to have 5 or 6 guys in coverage. We're going to plop Dallas Turner into that, and you can call a 3-man sim. You can call a you know, 2-man or a 3-man thing where you used to only be able to do a 2-man thing, and he can go, because he can go anywhere, he can change anything about those building blocks. So teams that know this about Brian Flores, right? Anybody that had, you know, anybody that's off the Belichick tree and runs it the same way, because all the Belichick defenses work like that, or anybody who played for a Belichick defense and therefore just knows this about the Vikings, is going to be able to say, okay, well, they're going to want to kind of split things up. So if we can read who's in what category, we can probably call our protections right and block these blitzes up. Well, now you have this like chaos agent that ruins all of that and totally obfuscates it way better. But for that to happen, you need to be able to trust him going from anywhere and doing anything. And that wasn't the case last year. He just didn't learn it. And it sounds like he's got a better grasp of things this year, which is why that expectation is different. And if he can have a little bit more bulk to like hold his spot a little bit better, then I think we really are cooking with gas. But that's like a few different ifs, and there's a lot of stuff that we need to like prove here. So there are still like obstacles to this, and I think it probably makes sense to go through like the thought process of what actually is the expectation we should set here, because this still isn't going to be an every down player, and we probably should acknowledge that. So we'll have that conversation next on Locked On Vikings. Moving along here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Thank you so much for coming and hanging out. So what do we expect from Dallas Turner next year? I think if your answer is he should be an every down player or it was a bad draft pick, and I think a lot of people think that way, and you probably can already pencil it in then as bad. He's not going to be an every down player next year. Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Grenard are too good for that. And if you want to critique that and say, hey, you went and did something kind of luxury and redundant at a high cost because they traded up to do it, and that was bad. You can make that critique, but they knew they were doing that at the time. So I'm going to guess that like they're fine with it. But that is, I think, a perfectly valid thing that you can say, hey, you shouldn't have done that. But I think to call it a holistically bad draft pick, you probably need to play on their terms, and you probably need to say you didn't get what you thought you were getting out of this, right? You talk about a bad draft pick like Lewis Seen, right? That we all know is bad, so we can kind of use this as an example. They thought they were replacing Harrison Smith with that. They thought they were getting a good player, and they thought, or upgrading on Cam Bynum, who I don't think they really knew what they had yet in Cam Bynum when they made that draft. They'd only seen 1 year of him, and it was under Zimmer. He played like 4 games. So they thought they were getting an every down player, and they turned out to not get that at all. Okay, bad draft pick. But like, if Dallas Turner does for them what they thought and brings back those packages, brings back that extra versatility and that extra creativity, right? That is a really dynamic and interesting system, and another sort of variable that Brian Flores can screw with. And now he can draw up and dream up even crazier stuff that's going to really stress out, for sure, the younger quarterbacks on the schedule, but even the guys that have seen a lot of this stuff and have a long history of beating the blitz, like Joe Burrow or Jared Goff. Who are both on the schedule, or, the Eagles and Jalen Hurts, one of the best O-lines in the NFL. And by the way, maybe the other one you'd put in that category is on the schedule in Detroit twice. And maybe one of the other ones in the Ravens is on the schedule. So these are some really, really good offensive lines at picking up blitzes and figuring this stuff out. To trick them, you're going to have to get real crazy. They're not going to fall for the first trick in the book, like, say, Jacksonville or Tennessee did last year when they were like super messy, and they would give it to you for free just by screwing up. So with the way the schedule is this year, you're going to need that. And so if they get that, if they solve that problem of, hey, we had this, murderer's row of O-lines, and we actually were able to get them all on their heels and get all this production out of that just by this package, even if that doesn't come from Dallas Turner directly, even if it just is enough to screw with things and, Jonathan Grenard gets a bunch of sacks, I would say that they got what they needed out of that. So that's one way to kind of set the expectation. Is I don't want to put a number on it, because I think that makes that leads to very rigid thinking. If you've ever been in like a corporate meeting and you've heard about like SMART goals, I hate it. I've heard that presentation a bunch of times at like other places that I've worked, and I think they're stupid as all heck. It's maybe my hottest corporate take. There you go. Hot corporate takes here on Locked On Vikings. But I think they're really stupid, because I think the measurable part, the M in SMART, forces people into really rigid thinking. And it forces people to sort of optimize their entire workflow around getting to that goal and to only that goal, which is why I'm always so reticent to say, well, he should play, 800 snaps, and he should get at least 6 sacks, and he should get blah, blah. I could make up numbers if you want, but I wouldn't mean it, and I don't think that that's the right way to think about it, like, ever. So instead, give me a concept, and then at the end of the year, you can look back on this and say, okay, do we feel like they fulfilled that concept? And yeah, that's not like a fully objective thing, but it probably isn't going to be that hard. And if it is, then you can call it okay, they did okay. You know, you can say they did medium and kind of move on. So for me, one of the big goals for Dallas Turner is I need to see proof of that concept. I need to see Dallas Turner on the field and wacky stuff happening because Dallas Turner is on the field. And I need to see it be effective too. I need to see wacky stuff come in and really cool blitzes where I'm making a Patreon video after the game going, look how cool this design is and how it takes advantage of jet protection. And the only other player that really has had that impact on the Vikings is Joshua Metellus. I remember one of my favorite Patreon videos that I ever did, and I know that Josh Metellus himself has seen this, is one that I made in 2023. It was during the Dobbs sanity thing against the Saints, and everyone was talking about that. I did make that one too, don't worry. But I also had I made one where I went over that sort of anatomy of a blitz thing, that the spiel I gave you before, and described how the Vikings lured the Saints into calling a particular protection by presenting their threats in a very specific way. It's not random chaos. It's somebody is here and it's forcing the center to acknowledge them and forcing the center to adjust to them and then attacking the weakness that adjustment is going to present. And you're kind of not giving the center a choice because the center can't look at Josh Metellus as an overhang defender threatening blitz and like not take it seriously, especially if you've already done something that occupies the running back. And then there is I think this case, it was somebody else on the outside, and it was Josh Metellus himself was the blitzer coming up the A gap, which is where the weak point in that protection is going to come when you force them to devote more resources to the outside. I want to be making that video again. I want to be looking at that and saying, wow, this is this really cool thing. In terms of what snap count I expect from Dallas Turner, I don't even know if I can expect it to be over 50. And again, maybe that is immediately a deal breaker for you for the 17th overall pick. I don't think in year 2 it is for me, especially because I know Van Ginkel just signed another 1-year deal, but like in an ideal world, the Van Ginkel or the Dallas Turner experiment in Minnesota is not just a rookie deal. And if he gets a second contract, that's how I know that they were like satisfied with what they got there. And if he does get a second contract, they let Van Ginkel walk and now he just becomes the starter for you and you're happy. But for now, considering they have this 3-headed monster, I don't need them to make the decision. I am taking Andrew Van Ginkel off the field to put in Dallas Turner. I don't need that decision to happen for me to like, that's too high of a bar. I don't need you to say, okay, and now he was a Pro Bowler in his second year that was better than the other Pro Bowler that was there. Like, then I think you're probably not giving the situation enough thought. Rather, I want to see all 3 of them on the field at the same time. I don't want that to just be bluster. Brian Flores said it, they should do it. If they didn't do it, he was lying and he didn't like Dallas Turner. I want to see that happen, and I want to see the impact of it. But the other thing I would love to see from Dallas Turner, and I think a signal we can get from preseason and from training camp, is where is he aligning and how often is it not at edge rusher? He'll probably be the main edge with like the second team, right? Which probably means he's going to play in the preseason. By the way, if Dallas Turner is inactive in the preseason, that's a really good sign. Because Grenard and Van Ginkel will almost certainly be inactive for the whole preseason. So if Dallas Turner doesn't play, really good sign. If he does, then we get to look for what he is doing. And one of the things that I'm curious to see how much they do line him up off the ball as an off-ball linebacker. Tyler Forno Fridays, he'll probably come on and talk about camp a little bit too when it's that time, is he thinks that that's like the plan with Dallas Turner, is that they're going to do that. They're going to take Ivan Pace off the field because he doesn't like Ivan Pace. They're going to take Ivan Pace off the field, stick him on the bench where he belongs, and have Dallas Turner be the off-ball linebacker. I don't think that's going to be a full-time thing. But I do see like a package every once in a while where they have Dallas Turner play off the ball, especially if Pace or Blake Cashman get hurt and they both have injury histories. So that's also something. But the difference with off ball and something we can see is your first step as an off ball linebacker is a totally different thing then your first step as a D lineman, no matter if you're interior or exterior, is all going to be about explosion and the stance you get in and how explosive that first step can be, how much force you can exert into the guy blocking you. Can you stand him up? Can you just explode past him if he's too slow out of his stance? All of that is based on, the first couple like milliseconds after the snap, right? For a linebacker, you will often take what is called a read step, where you're stepping a little bit, or maybe you're even just chopping your feet in place and you're getting ready to go somewhere, but you're giving it a second so you can determine what's going on here. You're reading run pass, you're reading, left, right, you're reading what kind of zones you have to go in, what are the routes going to be and all that stuff. You take a second to just gather information. And there's a technique to a read step. There's a way you're supposed to do it that needs to be learned and mastered before you can put him there on an NFL field. So if Dallas Turner does a lot of that in camp, that'd be an interesting thing to watch. Did he play a little off-ball linebacker? Well, how does read step look? But if he plays in the preseason, and then he does a little bit of off-ball stuff in the preseason, that will be an informative in and of itself. But we can also look, okay, how do the fundamentals of linebacker look for Dallas Turner, somebody who has not played linebacker? If they're going to add that to his repertoire, we can sort of see an exact progress report of all the stuff he's been working on behind the scenes while he hasn't been playing. Can we know if that's been productive? The scenario where we can really start to doom, where we can really start to look at Dallas Turner as somebody who's stock his way down, who's in that nosedive, is the one where he just plays on the edge all the time. He's not covering. He's not doing anything interesting. He's just a second team edge rusher, maybe the third team edge rusher, and then he doesn't play at all. And he just is a backup. And okay, great, you got a backup edge rusher with your 17th overall pick that you paid a bunch. Then we can all get as mad as we want. But I think there's ways that this can work that turn into something really cool that Brian Flores has hinted at. And so I think it's worth talking out what exactly we think the role is going to look like. And when camp and preseason really start up, I think it should be one of the main things. And for me on this show, it's going to be one of the main things that we talk about is what Dallas Turner's up to. And I would be pretty surprised if I wasn't making a Patreon video about Dallas Turner one way or another by the end of the preseason. You can find all those videos, by the way, at patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. Now is a great time to go watch the history doc, because the next week of Locked On Vikings is going to be history focused. If I miss any news, it's because I'm out of town and I'm sorry, but all of these pre-recorded episodes are anecdotes of Vikings history. Some of it is going to overlap with the history doc, but a lot of it was made of kind of what was on the cutting room floor. What I didn't have room for, what I didn't have time for, what I just didn't fit into the flow of the episode, of stories that, or stuff that I just didn't get to spend as much time on as I wanted, from throughout the decades. Things like why the Vikings are purple. I mentioned it in the history doc, but I didn't get to deep dive it as much as I want, because the choice to make the Vikings purple is way more salacious and dramatic than you might think. Stuff like the 1997 wild card game, not the 98 year that everybody remembers, but the year before it that saved the Vikings from moving out of Minneapolis. That's real. That game actually kept the franchise in Minnesota in a very material and documentable way. And how, the Vikings have evolved into a franchise that has a specific face in a way that they never really were in the old times. They have, Adrian Peterson as a guy. Now it's Justin Jefferson, how these guys compare, and many, many other things. That is the next week on Locked On Vikings. There'll be football parties, of course. They won't include me, but there'll be football parties if you're into that as well. I will see you, my present me, will see you all in a week, but you will all see my face again on Monday. And as always, Skull.